Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Friday, December 15th, 2023, and in just around 11 months, less than, the 2024 election will be entirely concluded. We are starting off our series here about the current state of the 2024 presidential race less than a year out. This is a great time to start beginning our series here of understanding how the 2024 race is shaping up to be. This is something I did during 2020, during the 2022 midterms, 2018. I didn't have a YouTube channel for the 2016 election, so this is the second presidential election that we are going to be covering and tracking in real time through the next year. Now, the current state of the race is very, very similar to where we were back in 2020, at least in terms of party nominations. Right now, President Donald Trump is at a very good place on the GOP side with a national lead of around 50 points across the board. Democrats on Joe Biden's side has a 60-point lead with 67% of the Democratic Party votes, meaning that presently Donald Trump and Joe Biden are at equal places amongst their own party for their nominations. So it looks like we're in for a rematch, a Biden versus Trump election again. But the circumstances surrounding this election are very different than the ones surrounding the previous. Public perception on the economy is worse than where it was during COVID-19. The perception of President Biden and President Trump is negative right now, and Democrats and Republicans are scrambling internally to figure out how they are going to position themselves to win the upcoming election. Now, President Biden seems to be very much focused on governing as a way of working towards his reelection. We have not seen the full extent of the Biden campaign. They have not been going out to swing states. Rallies have not been held. Investments into the primary season have only started to begin now, whereas the Donald Trump campaign has been very focused on the primary and, of course, the general election. So right now, I would say we are seeing two sides of a campaign where you have an incumbent who, very similar to how Donald Trump was back in 2019, not full-fledged campaigning, rather focusing on serving out the duties as president because you have more than one responsibility when you're running for re-election as an incumbent, whereas Donald Trump, on the other hand, has a lot more free time than the incumbent president because he isn't serving as president of the United States. So that's the state of the race in terms of time commitments, in terms of where we are seeing campaigns in full-fledged and full forces and the primary season. But you're here to talk about the general election, and so am I. Today, we are going to be taking a look at this election prediction between the two candidates. Right now, we are going to declare all of the states in which Joe Biden and Donald Trump are the safe victors as of right now, meaning that we expect them to win these states by pretty significant margins. We're talking anywhere above 15%, something that we would say categorically cannot go to the other side. Thus why we say it's in the safe category. It's in the safe column. Those words will be used interchangeably, but it's all the same idea. These states are solid red and solid blue, and right now, we're characterizing all of the states that Donald Trump, without a doubt, will be able to win in the upcoming election. Now, Donald Trump starts out with roughly 122 safe states. These are very solid ones, but Democrats also have a pretty hefty safe column as well. They have the entirety of the West Coast, Washington, Oregon, California, states like Hawaii going across to the East Coast. It's coast to coast, truly speaking. And we're going to characterize all of those states right now. These are states and districts. Maine and Nebraska are the two states in the country where they allocate electoral votes based on congressional districts. So Maine's first is safe blue. Maine's second and Nebraska's second are competitive, and then Nebraska's first and third are safe red. So that's why you might see some congressional maps drawn here. But overall, these states really are how they are declared just overall to winner take all statewide. On Illinois, that one goes to the Democrats. So roughly we're around here when it comes down to states that are less than 15-point margins in terms of our expectations for either side of the aisle. Joe Biden has an initial lead with 181 electoral votes. Donald Trump is roughly 122. Now, I will say a lot of these states we are going to see general directions and trends that they have been maintaining over the past 6 years continued in 2024. For instance, we have a likely column which characterizes states anywhere between 5 and 15% in terms of the predicted margin that in a landslide election for an opposing candidate, for example, if Joe Biden was to have the full force of indictments around Donald Trump and the way that he could collapse based on the verdicts of grand juries or judges, whatever it might be, there is a possibility that some of these states that we characterize as likely red could go blue. On the flip side of things, if Donald Trump was to have a maintenance of this momentum and building up to 5 to 6 points winning nationally, well, you very well could see some of these likely blue states that we will characterize in a moment go towards the Republican Party. So these are states where we can pretty much say with near certainty they're going to go to this side of the aisle, but Not always, right? And so that's where we are. So Ohio is likely red, Iowa is likely red as well. These are two states where you have Republicans who have been able to win for quite some time now, winning again, especially under Donald Trump being the Republican nominee. This also includes Maine's 2nd congressional district. This includes the state of Texas. This includes the state of Alaska. Now, these are the last states I would say are likely red. Iowa, Ohio, Texas, Alaska. I'm a little bit wavering on the state of Texas right now, but I do think that Donald Trump is in a slightly better position than where he was 4 years ago for the state of Texas. For context, Donald Trump won the state by 5.6%. So in terms of how it's categorized, it would have been likely red back in 2020. So that brings Donald Trump to 189 electoral votes. But very similar to the safe column, Joe Biden also has likely blue states. Not as many as there are likely red states. I would say the only likely blue states presently are Maine at large and Virginia as of right now. I think Joe Biden is in a position where he wins these states because of the margins. And also, actually, no, it was equal the amount of states. I completely forgot my other half side of the United States. Sorry to Colorado and New Mexico, states that I would also characterize as likely blue. So Colorado, New Mexico, Virginia, and Maine at large are all states I would say are likely. The reason for that being, Democrats have been able to do quite well here in recent times, in recent elections, even with an unpopular favorability rating for President Biden, right now serving as a very unpopular president with a roughly 38% approval nationwide, practically on par, in fact, lower in some instances than where Donald Trump was 4 years ago today. So not the best point going into a presidential election, but in some cases that doesn't matter. Because in the last presidential, Colorado went to Biden by 13.5, 14 points across the state. New Mexico went by double digits, Virginia went by double digits, and Maine was nearing there, and I would say reasonably, Joe Biden at least wins the states by more than 5 this time around, especially in a rematch against former President Donald Trump. That isn't to say there hasn't been some support that has been eroded. I absolutely think that has existed, and we see it now in terms of opinion polling data. But it is to say, there are still states that will hold out strong for Biden, and I believe these 4 to be part of them. So a new update on the numbers, 211 for Joe Biden, 189 for Donald Trump. Now this is where we really get into an interesting slate of competitive states and districts, because Nebraska's second is yet to be characterized. The reason for this is that all of these states I could see, in true honesty, going to either side of the aisle, depending on the circumstances. If Donald Trump is indicted, and you find that the grand jury says, they're not indicted, he has been indicted. If they find him guilty, if they decide that in a criminal case, in a court of law, that Donald Trump is guilty, he loses a lot of support. Opinion polling shows in data that might have Trump up by 10 points in a state. When they ask the second question, if Donald Trump is convicted by a grand jury in this exact case that he's already been indicted for and will stand trial for before the election, would you vote for him? How would you vote? The numbers flip. In some cases, up to 15 points. Biden will win states by 4 in situations where Donald Trump is convicted. Because what we know is that Americans don't want to vote for a criminal. That's why you have all this language around the Hunter Biden scandal, the Biden crime family, right? Donald Trump's criminal cases. These are things that American voters do not want attached to their candidate. And so what could happen in that case is that all of these states left characterized go blue. But on the flip side, if Donald Trump maintains momentum, if he maintains this lead that he has nationally, all of these states go red. So I think we are at a point presently where these could move in either direction, but I'm not going to cop out and say I'm not going to make a characterization. I will call them today as to where I think they are going to go as of right now. And we'll start off with states like Minnesota, where I could reasonably say as of now, Minnesota is going blue. I don't think it'll be the 7-point margin that it was, especially with an erosion of support on issues like the economy, on issues relating to a lot of social topics. You're talking about a whole wider range of things, especially what's happening in the Middle East, especially what's happening with abortion rights, especially what's happening with healthcare, what's happening on the domestic side of things with immigration, the war on books, the war on, child affirming care. There are gender affirming care for children. There are a lot of things that I think Republicans have been able in some cases to successfully campaign on, in some cases been unsuccessfully able to campaign on. But I do think on issues like the economy is going to be especially prevalent in this range here that I would characterize for, went for Biden last time, went for Trump in 2016. I think it's going to narrow up. I think that's just my take. I think that's where I'm at for Minnesota. I don't imagine, and I say this, I don't imagine Minnesota's going red. It has had the longest streak of voting blue, not the longest, but the most, the state that is least recently, I don't know how to phrase this, voted for a Republican 1972 was the last time Minnesota voted for a Republican, so it's been a long time coming if it does, but I don't think that it will. Minnesota, I think it's going to go blue. With that being said, we move over to some other states where I think Donald Trump, quite frankly, has the upper hand. Florida, he wins. Oh, and I apologize for this. I'm going to take ownership of this right now. I completely blanked on the state of Florida. So Florida should be characterized as a likely red state. The reason I didn't was because when I made this map just a month ago, 2 months ago, Florida was a lean red state. And so I think the calculus back then was that Florida still reverts back to being competitive on the national, but after Ron DeSantis' 20-point victory, I honestly think Trump's up to win Florida by 5 to 6 points. So throw out what I said earlier about the likely states ending at Texas. It actually includes Florida, which is a pretty substantial size. I mean, we've already characterized Minnesota for Democrats, and Florida just catches Donald Trump right back up. I also think that Trump is the favorite to win in North Carolina. Now, this is going to be narrower than Florida, but it's going to be a lean margin. Brings him to 235. 16 electoral votes. It's a pretty strong place to be, especially as Donald Trump only won the state last time by just a singular percentage point. Now, I think there are possibilities here for Biden and Trump to win in any of these remaining states, quite substantively. I do not think Joe Biden is going to win Florida. So when I made that whole conversation around these states will be the ones where the election is really fought in, take Florida out of your mind. I completely lapsed on why I had it characterized as toss-up and realized that is no longer where I think the state's going to go. So we have about 82 electoral votes that actually call the shot. So I'm going to practically go through these pretty quickly. I'll provide a general analysis of it, but I do think Joe Biden is at a weak point right now. With that being said, I think that we are going to see victories for candidates like Trump in states like Georgia. I think we are going to see it especially in the Rust Belt region. We are going to see it in states like Pennsylvania. We are going to see right now potentially a Donald Trump re-election. I think it is very plausible that Donald Trump wins re-election in 2024 as of now. What we have seen with President Biden and what we have seen in terms of the amount of enthusiasm we've seen on the Trump side and also the lack of enthusiasm we've seen on the Democratic side, opinion polling data that seems to suggest that Democrats are not in a good position. I understand that after 2022 and 2020 and 2016, we don't trust the polls as much. I think that's a fair place to be. But what we cannot deny and have to recognize, I think that's important too, is the consistency of it all. Because polls even that were accurate in 22 show Trump winning. Polls that were inaccurate in 22 also show Trump winning. Practically everywhere shows Trump winning. In a head-to-head matchup nationwide, only a singular poll has Biden up by 1, and it's the NPR Marist College poll. Besides that, Donald Trump leads on average by 3.1% nationwide. The two exceptions, Biden +1 and a tie. At this point in time in 2019, Biden was up 6.7% nationally, and Clinton in 2015 was up 5.8%. So clearly, a huge reversion from where we were 4 or 8 years ago. Not a good sign for Democrats. And like I said, the consistency of it all doesn't end at swing states. Georgia has Trump up by 6, according to Bloomberg. Pennsylvania has Trump up by 2. Michigan by 4. Wisconsin by 4. Nevada by 3. I think we are in a position where Donald Trump does have the capability to win in states like Michigan, win in states like Arizona, win in states like Nevada. I don't know if he entirely will. I think there are reasons to believe that he would or wouldn't. But right now, what the data is telling me, what the approval ratings are telling me, what we have seen from people on the ground and heard from organizers that were very crucial in getting Biden elected the first time around is that they are very terrified about the future because right now, public perception is not on the side of the Democratic Party. The only caution I have for Democrats that I think gives them a huge silver lining here is that despite Biden's unpopularity, the last election Democrats have really lost was in 2021 in the Virginia governor's race. That was the last big election that Democrats invested a lot of their energy in. That election was a referendum on President Biden. But nearly every election since then, at least top line, Senate control, House control, governorships, off-year elections, referendums, ballot initiatives, whatever it might be, Democrats have actually come out ahead. You look at 2022, Democrats gained seats in the Senate. You take a look at the governor's races in 22 as well. Abortion became an important issue. People were willing to look past the way that they viewed the economy, the way that they viewed the healthcare system, the way that they viewed immigration, the way that they viewed international policy and foreign policy, right? Those are things that people care about, vote on, but abortion became a mainstream issue. We also saw it happen with Andy Beshear in Kentucky, with Ohio voting for a constitutional right to abortion, with Virginia's legislature flipping blue, Mississippi's governorship narrowing up within 3 points. These things don't happen randomly. They happen because Democrats were able to organize enthusiasm and energy around them. And that's the one thing that I would say. Despite Biden's unpopularity throughout all of it, If this was 2010, we would have seen a very different result. If this was an Obama presidency prior to the Dobbs decision, we would have seen a different result. But that's not where we are. And that's the only silver lining, I think, right now that keeps Democrats together and tells them that the only poll more important than all the ones that we're seeing is the one on election day, and it's the ballot box. And I think that's what they're hoping they're going to hold on to. I do think in a state like Michigan, where we have seen a lot of people outcry, especially against President Biden from the Dearborn community, from the Arab community in the state, that was crucial in years past in electing Democrats being completely against where Biden is right now. And I think that is something that Democrats are going to have to figure out when you have these mass groups of people that were reliable Democratic voters that are no longer. I do want to say that we also recognize past elections. When we saw the abortion referendum on the ballot in the state of Michigan, you actually saw a significant reversion in support for Gretchen Whitmer in these type of communities, right? These groups of people who I would say, looking at the national figure, matter a lot to the Democratic Party, matter a lot in states like Michigan. But at the same time, Democrats are looking at it from the perspective of, can we still win in losing a lot of support amongst different minority groups? Because right now, that's what the numbers suggest. Biden is unpopular amongst minority groups. Biden is unpopular, some minority groups. Biden is unpopular amongst a bunch of different regions of the country, right? The Midwest, some parts of the Sun Belt, especially in swing states. Biden's unpopular in nearly every single one. And they have to ask why. Is it possible to still win with this unpopularity? History tells us maybe. Recent elections, though, in the past 4 years tell us yes. And so I think that's where my calculus comes in and says Michigan can still go blue. Even though some reliable Democratic voting bases are turning their backs on President Biden for a variety of reasons, I think at the same time, Democrats still have enough of a firewall to win elections. And I think that's what we're going to see happen in states like Michigan, but it will not be enough to win in states like Wisconsin and Pennsylvania. And that's why I put Michigan in the tilt blue column, the first tilt state that we have put on this map so far, because I expect the victory for Biden as of right now in Michigan to be less than 1%. So that brings me over to the West Coast, to Nevada and Arizona, where again, furthermore, in a different minority community, talking about Latino voters, we have seen a reversion in support from the Democrats, also in the 2022 midterms, but especially looking at the trends from 2016 through 2020 that should be alarming for Democrats for 2024. Hillary Clinton did very well in terms of her margins amongst Latino voters across the country. You look at Miami-Dade County as an example, and not to refer to them as a monolith, but you do see substantial improvements between Clinton versus where Biden ended up in 2020. And so that calls into question, is this a Biden thing? Is this a Democratic Party thing? The midterm seems to suggest it depends on where you're talking about, right? In Florida, Hispanic voters did turn more away from Democrats further than they did in 2020. So that seems to be a Democratic Party thing. But then you look at 2022 in Arizona and Nevada, where you saw Latino voters backing Democrats by more than they did back Biden in the 2020 election. So all of that comes into consideration. Everything matters. Every single vote, every single group matters in this country. With that being said, I do think we have seen a decrease in support for Joe Biden across these two states. I think history tells me that Nevada holds out. History does not tell me that Arizona holds out. I think we have seen a pretty consistent strategy that has worked effectively for Democrats in Nevada. They're able to walk back where they were in 22 even. They won despite all the shakeups within the Democratic Party leadership there. That was a lot of drama, a lot of consideration about what this means for the future of the party. Well, they ended up winning, right? And so they lost the governorship, but they won the Senate race. That was one that many people did not expect to happen. But Nevada stayed blue, at least for the most part. 3 out of 4 House seats. The Senate race went blue. The governorship went away, but Steve Sisolak wasn't the most popular candidate. On the presidential, I do think Joe Biden would win Nevada, but in Arizona, it's only recently turned a purple state. It's a state that has voted for Republicans since every election since 1992, except for 2020. But then it was Biden by 0.27%. It's not impossible to see how Arizona could flip back to red depending on where Biden is. So this is my estimation of where we are on the national map. Donald Trump wins the re-election with 291 electoral votes to Joe Biden's 247. A lot of these states are still up for grabs. Things can change between now and Election Day. And I think many Democrats are looking at this and they're saying, not just obviously this map, but the polls. They're looking at the pundit ratings. They're looking at the betting markets and saying, Joe Biden isn't exactly in the strongest position right now. He needs to improve, and there are plenty of things that cannot be ignored. And I think a wake-up call will be realizing that there is a pathway to victory, but it needs to be capitalized on. It needs to be done now and start moving, getting that ball turning Because at some point, 6 months down the line, if this momentum continues for Donald Trump, you're going to see states like Wisconsin and Pennsylvania move from lean red to likely red. You're going to see states like Arizona and Georgia revert back to how they voted in 2016 when they voted for Trump by 4 in Arizona and 6 in Georgia. These are things that have happened in recent elections, can happen again, but Democrats still have a fighting chance. This election is far from over. And this map, although does show Democrats at a disadvantage, it isn't as bad as where Republicans were 4 years ago. All to say that I think this election will be more competitive than the last one, despite how close it was across those battleground states. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video you can watch, and then a playlist for my 2024 presidential election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all tomorrow.